Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Crexi Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. In this show, we cover a broad range of topics that cater to commercial real estate newcomers and industry leaders alike. I'm your host, Yannis Papadakis, Business Development Manager at Crexi's auction platform, and we're thrilled to sit down with Adam Palmer, Principal and Managing Director at LQ Commercial. A little bit about our guest. Adam's early professional experience began not in commercial real estate, but instead as a software engineer, where he built field applications and databases for some of this country's largest police and fire departments. It was only thereafter that Palmer's focus switched over to commercial real estate, where he's built a book of business that includes Fortune 500 companies and well-known institutional investors. He's widely recognized as a leader within the industry and around the community. Perhaps most notably, Palmer is the global president-elect of the CCIM Institute and has received dozens of industry awards. Adam also holds the SIOR designation and is one of less than 200 dual specialists in the world after being recognized for his transactional volume in the office and industrial sectors. He's a past executive committee member of Florida Realtors, past president of Commercial Investment Professionals, at-large board member with the Horizon Council, and regularly contributes to various philanthropic and charitable efforts. If that's not enough, he can also often be found contributing to the courts as an expert witness or speaking at various real estate events, business functions, and universities. He's been covered by national media outlets such as Fox, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, and finally, the Crexi Podcast. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
Now, we just covered a little bit about your background, but I'd love to hear more about your career path and some lessons learned along the way. Can you walk us through your journey?
Yeah. So grew up in the hospitality business. That was an invaluable part of kind of creating the makeup of what would become maybe my professional personality. And, some of the opportunities that I learned there just, really paid off when it came to becoming a professional in commercial real estate.
Nice. And how has growing up in the family hospitality business influenced your work ethic, client relationships, developing relationships, that sort of thing?
Maybe most notably just the ability to develop relationships with people on a daily basis. When you're working in a family business and hospitality, you really have to be prepared for every day being different, much like commercial real estate. Dealing with the unexpected that can happen at any time. And I think that was a great start and unknown value to being successful in commercial real estate.
And I mean, opposite side of the spectrum from hospitality to tech, how did your time in the tech space, shape your approach to problem solving in commercial real estate?
Key would probably be just the innovation itself, and maybe having a little bit different purview in problem solving, compared to maybe what some of my friendly competitors had as a professional experience. Also just the approach to the analytics on it, being able to get the appropriate training and education to set as much of the emotion aside as you can and dealing with, instead of the zeros and ones of software, but the zeros and ones of investment analysis.
Right. Now, what drove your transition from technology to commercial real estate?
Well, I never owned the software that I was working on, so financially I wasn't getting to where I wanted to be quick enough. By the grace of God, I had the coincidence of meeting a couple people and becoming friends with two individuals that happened to be in commercial real estate. One of them was at NAI in Fort Lauderdale, and another one was at Cushman in Miami. And I hadn't really quite made the connection between growing up in the hospitality business and what you eventually and subconsciously crave as far as in working with people on a daily basis. But as much as people would think that technology is different every day, some of the being behind the monitor and the coding aspects of it, it was really a bit monotonous to me. And as I mentioned, I was really craving working with people. And so there was a couple opportunities to where, I might have been venting a little bit of my frustrations with where my career was at that time. And there was always some suggestions out there, oh, you should be in commercial real estate. And so one day I listened.
Well, your background spans diverse roles and industries. How have those experiences shaped your current skill set?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the vast majority of the commercial real estate industry probably didn't intend to get there. So, many of us have those examples of what got us here. And, there's great value in that, in kind of creating who you are. And I think that, based on how you asked it, Yannis, as far as in the diversity between professional experience, I think that there was a lot to learn there by being nimble. We as commercial real estate professionals are often expected to be a jack of all trades, not necessarily just for those that are generalists in our industry, but even with the difference of clients that we work with on a day-to-day basis. You can be a specialist in, big box industrial and logistics space, but that doesn't mean that the needs that need to be met from one client to the next aren't going to be different. So, really just having the mindset of being nimble, being able to identify what problems may vary from, what client to the next, and making sure that you're not always walking through wet cement and getting your feet stuck in one place.
Right. Well, I'd love to hear if there were some lessons from early in your career that have stayed with you as you've moved into leadership positions.
Oh, many. Something that comes to mind would, as you get longer in your career and more established, one of the skill sets as a professional you can pick up is kind of being able to maybe listen to your gut instincts a little bit more. When you're new in the business, you're in the cut your teeth age of your career, and you're working on just about every lead that comes your way. And then as you get older, maybe you think back to some of those instances and you feel, oh, maybe this lead isn't worthwhile, and maybe you pass that lead off, or worse yet, maybe that's a lead that doesn't even get a phone call back. But, I tried to make sure to, not only in my daily habits, but encourage this of other people that I trained, to not diminish leads too quickly. And sometimes it's as simple as, hey, you never know when, a 1,000 square foot lease lead might turn into a $10 million acquisition. You just never know. But, there's other leads too that really have so much upside when you pursue it. And it makes me think back to a story when I first started. When I first started in the industry, I was in a 4-foot cubicle. Had no idea what I didn't know yet, but I was ready to take over and do everything that I could to make a significant impact in commercial real estate. And I remember about 6 months into being at that office, there was a gentleman, we'll call him Bob, and he had worked in corporate America for a long time for AT&T, and you could tell that this guy was not appreciating the industry very much. And he finally got a nice sized deal. I think it was a 47-unit apartment complex, and he might have had a nice 5-figure salary, and it was a mic drop moment for him. I'm out. And so Bob had a desk instead of a 4-foot cubicle. Now, granted, he was in an office with 2 other people, but he actually had a desk and a door. And so the broker asked me, hey, would you like to take over Bob's desk? Of course, I love the idea of having a closed door. And I went in there, and Bob's files were still on the desk. And so I brought those back to my broker. I said, well, what do you want me to do with all these files? And the broker said, well, you can go through them or you can throw them away, whatever. Pretty much just stop bothering me. And so I went back to that desk, and I started going through those files. And there's 2 clients whose prospect files were in that stack that sat on Bob's desk that are still clients today, 20 years later. And I can tell you that millions of dollars of revenue have accumulated over the years from those 2 contacts. And so, the lesson to the new people out there and the old, don't diminish leads. Make sure that you work them all.
Amazing. Yeah, you never know where a great contact is going to come from. And this is a
Yeah,
relationship business at the end of the day, right? And the more
absolutely.
opportunities you have to make relationships, the better your career will ultimately be in the long term. Do you have any favorite mistakes or significant challenges that ultimately course corrected your career?
Sure, sure. How do you learn without mistakes, right? And um, it makes me think, over the 20 years, there's plenty of case studies, examples that I could talk about here, and not to be a shameless plug, but I am planning on launching a podcast of my own with just micro segments later on to talk about some of these deals that really presented some nice lessons, opportunities, and one of them makes me think back to a circumstance to where I was still really new in my career, and I needed that deal to close, at least in my mind. There was some expenses coming up pertaining to some things that we were hoping to do as an engaged couple and planning a wedding. And so I really thought that this deal was going to be critical. And I started to develop what I've labeled since as commission breath. I was focused on the commission in that particular instance way more than I was the client, way more than I was the asset. I was a transactional broker in that moment, focused on a commission. Thankfully, the deal did not go through. And I was able to really absorb that deal not closing as an opportunity to learn from it and realize that that was the last time that I was ever going to catch myself with commission breath. And from that day forward, I made sure to always treat clients' money as if it was my own.
It's funny you mentioned that too, because I think outsiders that look at real estate, commercial real estate, I feel like there is the misconception that most brokers are operating on commission breath. But the truth is, if you're in this industry long enough, you get to connect with, professionals in commercial real estate and real estate that, ultimately stand out because of their ability to take care of the clients, versus, solely being transactional. So, I mean, it's a really good lesson for anybody, at any period of their career here is, how well are you taking care of the client? Because ultimately that's going to give you longevity.
You hit the nail right on the head there, Yannis. Since that moment, there's been times to where, I've advised clients to go with a bird in the hand that didn't involve them paying me a fee because it made more sense. And the moment you can advise your client to do something that has less monetary gain for yourself, that's when you're building clients for life.
Yeah. Are there some fundamental tenets of your work ethic that you maintain today? And if so, could you share that with us?
Sure. I mean, you said work ethic, so I mean, right there, that's the most important one to me. Whether it was growing up and playing sports in high school and college, nobody was going to out hustle me. I was never the most athletically gifted on the field or on the court, but I always had great work ethic instilled in me by my parents, and was making sure that that carried over into my professional life. So the hustle itself, the chip on the shoulder, the determination, these are things that you can't really train in the business. You either have that hustle or you don't. But, I love the upside that commercial real estate offers for those that do. I tell people that one of the things that I enjoy most about commercial real estate is the endless amount of work. That if you were physically capable of working 24 hours a day, the clock would strike midnight, and guess what? There's more you could be doing. So for the people that have that work ethic and that raw determination, the opportunities are endless.
Yeah. If you love it, there's more, you
Yeah.
don't have to stop. There's always more.
The glass never empties.
There we go. Any daily habits or practices that have become essential to your career, whether related to commercial real estate or not?
Well, I guess I'll focus on the not part that you ended the sentence with. And as much as we talked about the work ethic and the hustle, I feel that it's equally important to have favorable life-work balance. I try to think 20 years in the future, and what's going to be more of a valuable and lasting memory to me? Is it going to be, attending some of our son's football games or seeing our daughter perform on stage? Or is it going to be, an office building that I sold down the street? And I think we all know what the correct answer is as far as in which one's going to mean more to us and which memory is going to be more lasting. So I think it's critically important that, you're able to establish certain understanding of boundaries with your clients. And perhaps, those clients may not be as understanding of some of those boundaries and priorities that you have in your life. And if that's the case, then maybe there should be some new clients.
Yep. Well, you've won dozens of awards over the span of your commercial real estate career. What do you attribute that recognition and success?
It's really the clients itself. You can have the greatest product in the world, but if there's not a target market for it, you can be the greatest musician and Grammy winner in the world, but without a fan base, there are no accolades. So having great clients is, really one of the blessings that have been bestowed upon me in this career. And, a segment of clients that, I've taken a great amount of respect and feel humbled to. When you come across clients who are maybe closer to a divesting age than an investing age, that especially means a lot to me. The comparison that I've drawn up in my own mind is, it's 1 second on the clock, one play left, fourth and goal from the one in the Super Bowl, and they're handing the ball off to you, and you got to take a great amount of responsibility and pride with that.
If you don't mind sharing, I'd love it if you could give some actionable takeaways that you can recommend to young brokers that they can use to optimize their work today. What's the first thing that they should focus on to position themselves for long-term success?
What I would answer to that might not be just limited to young brokers. I think it's young professionals in general. You asked that question. I was just on a flight a few days ago, and I was sitting next to a young lady who was a freshman at LSU, and she was very concerned as a freshman that she wasn't concreting her major yet. And I tried to convince her that there's plenty of time still, and that as a freshman in college, that you don't need to know what it is that you want to do for a career yet at that point. There's going to be plenty of opportunity and time still. And I think there's a message there for brokers as well. A lot of times you get into the industry and they try to encourage you right away to pick your specialty. And I understand what some of the mantra is behind that, but I also think that there's a little bit of the chicken and an egg quandary there, to ask somebody to pick a sector and a product type that they specifically want to focus on without really being able to get in and touch and feel what it's like working in one sector to another. So I would encourage others to just be patient and to try to get a balanced education of the industry and figure out what kind of product types really speak best to you. What's the best personality trait and symbiotic nature there? Because I can assure you that the decision makers from one sector to the next are going to be a little bit different personality types as well. So try to search for alignment. It makes me think of a story with one of my business partners. We were having sushi one day, and this kind of ties into what you were speaking about, Yannis, with commission breath. But over sushi, John had asked me if you had to say that you were one or the other, a salesperson or an order taker. I said, geez, salesperson or order taker, any other options? He says, no, that's it, salesperson or order taker. And I said, well, between those two, I guess I would be, say, a salesperson. And he said, you see, that's the problem with our industry. And, this is how we often get classified as used car salesmen. And, John is, one of the preeminent national retail tenant rep people in the country, but, that's such a small component of what our industry is. And it makes sense that, he would have that perspective that, I need to be an order taker to be really good at my job, because, in national retail tenant rep, you're running accounts, and they often already have all of their formulas based to where, we're looking for this kind of population, this kind of traffic account. We can't be this near to this competitor, but we can't be this far from that competitor. And you put it all in, and here you go. Do you want option A or option B? Yeah, it's great to be an order taker, but salesmanship may be required if you're trying to show a 10,000 square foot office shelf space that you're competing with 20 other opportunities and trying to convince them why this alternative is going to be better for them. So the moral back is that take your time, find out what's going to be best fit and what you think is going to be putting you in the best position for success.
Thanks for that. Now, shifting gears a little bit, I'm interested in learning more about your experience in technology and your insights on the intersections of tech and commercial real estate. Given your strong backgrounds in both tech and commercial real estate, how do you see the two industries converging now and in the near future?
Great question. Billion-dollar question, really. I feel, as somebody with a tech background, and this was probably a shared sentiment for commercial real estate professionals that do not have a tech background, but I feel that commercial real estate is really lagging when it comes to modern use of technology. We're making headway, but it feels often at a snail's pace, even when you compare it to that of residential real estate, which I feel has a better implementation of technology than what commercial real estate said. That being said, I feel that the pace of advanced technologies for the industry is about to take off.
Now, what's your take, and I know this is kind of a buzzword here, but what's your take on the current role of AI in commercial real estate? Is it overhyped or underutilized? How are you seeing it?
All of the above. On the surface, if we're talking about the true aspect of artificial intelligence technology, it is not overhyped. But it does remind me to a little bit of a consumer buzz. Years ago, you slapped organic on a package and you were just going to be able to increase your retail value on it. So, I see some technologies out there that are often being categorized as artificial intelligence without even being the true definition of AI. And so, it's difficult for some people, that might not be appropriately and technologically trained to kind of know the difference. But I think that in agreeing that it's not overhyped, we know that it's going to be an all-industry changer, with potential of serious disruptions from one industry to the next. You look at Goldman Sachs' study on, forecast for what percentage of workforce and employment could be at risk just within a short window of 5 years. When you look at those kind of studies and you think about, okay, well, the amount of space that artificial intelligence at an employee is going to need just from a commercial real estate needs is certainly going to be less than a butt in the seat. And so you're seeing some of that with increased demand for data center space and what kind of value is being placed on that. And then you look at some of the perfect storm that we've had, with office taking multiple black eyes, from the pandemic, and now with what kind of speculative impact there could be from artificial intelligence. It's certainly something to stay in tune and keep your eye on.
Now, on our prep call, you mentioned learning more about AI's potential in commercial real estate at REDCon and other conferences. What realizations stood out to you most from those discussions?
I went to REDCon in Times Square last April, and it was kind of a last-minute decision to attend, as I was trying to work on what kind of AI technologies should be implemented at the CCIM Institute. And I went there with a lot of great excitement, thinking that there was going to be a tremendous light bulb moment of this person has figured it out, and I'm going to immediately need to implement those technologies at the Institute in my own personal work, daily life, and business development is going to spike. However, that light bulb moment never really came. There was a lot of valuable discussion from some industry leaders on what kind of technologies are available today to increase a lot of efficiencies in operations and daily practice. But again, that light bulb moment from a business development standpoint, and that's the deal junkie in me, it wasn't there. And so I guess in that aspect, Giannis, the greatest takeaway that I brought from there was we're not too far behind, that this is still new to so many, and that there's still a lot of opportunity that lies ahead.
Now, saying that we're not quite there yet also implies that there will be a time that we do get there. When do you think AI will make a measurable impact on deal making or property management?
Good question. It's difficult to pinpoint, when that impact will really be on us, that across the board impact. Right now it feels that there's like a race to deliver these products that is similar to a land rush or being the first to land on the moon. But I think it's relatively near. I do not expect it to be industry wide, perhaps. Property management, definitely. There's some great products that are already coming available in property management, and site selection and maintenance reporting. I think that there's a lot of great products available today for property management in particular. I also think that there's going to be deeper and more insightful analysis of certain acquisition and disposition opportunities. In that vein, I'm currently working on maybe a different way of analyzing some product myself.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm working on this with CCIM right now, and it came about from a call that we had with some of our fellow volunteer leaders in Korea. And as we were talking with some of the Korean chapter leaders, they began to tell us about how new some of our concepts in curriculum were. And here in America, we take for granted some of these concepts that we've been working with for many decades, whether it just be the predominant cap rate evaluation, cash flow analysis, IRR, debt service coverage ratio, all these concepts that have been available to us for a long time. The idea of cap rates itself has been around much longer than the CCIM Institute. I believe that the Appraisal Institute might have been more involved with that than the CCIM Institute. But when the Korean chapter leaders were telling us that our ideas that we take for granted and have been using for 70, 80 years, if not longer, are 10 years new to them, it also made me think, what's next for us? Why don't we have something that's new or even 10 years new to us? And so I started working on trying to create some new metrics that could maybe do a better job of deeper analysis based on what the consumer habit, the risk criteria, or other criteria that could be set from one sector or one client to another.
That's fascinating. And I mean, how somebody evaluates a deal largely depends on their investment thesis, right? What their end goal is. And so it makes sense that, the metrics being used aren't one size fits all for everybody. It really, if you've got a limited toolkit on how to evaluate a deal, it forces you to exist within, the construct of this is how deals are evaluated, where, your priorities for a deal may vary wildly from a different investor depending on what their investment thesis is. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about kind of some of the things?
Sure. Maybe without going full secret sauce on you, I
Yeah.
can a little bit of a sneak peek. Crexi does a great job, especially in my opinion, in income producing investment real estate. And so if you're working with a 1031 buyer out there and you've got an idea of what their general criteria is, and they're out there I think a lot of us start to look at cap rates first. And so you look at, okay, based on, what that acquisition criteria is, we know what their minimum yield expectations are. And then you start to look at the other layers of the onion. Okay, well, how many years of term are remaining? What are the annual bumps? What's the credit like? And then you just start looking at some of the, actual underlying real estate values itself. Is this an emerging market? Is this a tax-free state? There's all these components that are critical that us as experienced brokers kind of start to peel back that onion on, to not just propose, well, hey, this one is an X cap rate. But what if there was a more automated approach to taking that expertise that we have as professionals and being able to score properties a little bit different? Because if you're going to put 3 properties on your identification list from 1031, the likelihood that each of them is going to be a clean apple to apple to apple comparison is not going to be very likely. And so what if you had a metric that was created that better knew what your consumer habit and preferences were, so that you could compare an apple to an orange and a banana quicker?
Yeah, I mean, even in the world of retail net lease properties, right? You may be looking as a potential 1031 upleg, 3 different Burger Kings with 15-year leases. They're all corporate guaranteed, right? And same building, same footprint, right? Same lease, same guarantor, but they're different deals, right? Depending on where they are, traffic counts, population density, hard corner, signalized corner, mid block. Like, there are all these other factors that really matter, depending on what your goal is. So that's pretty fascinating. I'm interested to see, that property score and
Coming soon to a Crexi line item near you.
fantastic. Love it. Well, speaking of that, how do you recommend brokers and professionals in commercial real estate stay ahead of the curve as technology evolves?
First and foremost, don't fight change. Stay informed, on the topic. Read articles, attend symposiums. Also, we mentioned this earlier, be nimble. I don't feel that all your eggs need to be in one basket. Even today, we have some, what you might label as major players within the artificial intelligence space. I don't feel that there's any concrete evidence. You can hedge opinions, but I don't feel that there's any concrete evidence today as to what developers or products are assured of being the must-have products 5 years from now.
So stay informed, you can't be ahead of the curve if you're not looking at the road, right?
That's right.
What challenges do you foresee in implementing AI or other technologies in commercial real estate? And, from kind of a basic perspective, I know most people within the industry are really looking forward to, use AI and implement it in their businesses, but there could be some downfalls. I mean, just in AI with other, applications, sometimes AI hallucinates, right? What are the challenges that you see either in brokerages or in investment firms?
Given my software background, it's really interesting for me to try to forecast this. On one hand, I could list some national brokerages and other entities that I feel are maybe more in tuned to some of these advanced technologies today versus their competitors. But at the same time, I question whether or not the ROI is going to be there for them in perpetuity. Buffett says it well, that risk comes from not knowing what you're doing, right? And these commercial real estate companies, they are not tech companies. Meanwhile, you have tech companies that want to become everything. Apple was primarily a hardware developer well before they became a full-fledged media company with an array of electronic products. Amazon was merely a bookstore well before it was in the conversation of overtaking Walmart as the largest retailer in the world. And so then the debate starts to become, do we position ourselves to try to stay nimble and hope to pick the right third-party vendors, or do we gamble on trying to create our own intellectual property in hopes of combating disruption? It's just a very interesting debate.
Yeah, I mean, I know from personal experience coming from brokerage prior to joining Crexi that sometimes when a brokerage firm tries to invest in their own technology, it can backfire, right?
Mm.
You can spend a lot of money and then wind up in the exact same place that you started, because at the end of the day, tech is its own beast. Commercial real estate, and tech intersect often, more often now than they ever have before. But yeah, especially with implementing things like AI, it can be very costly if you don't have a dedicated, data team to, really train that AI up on what it needs to know. And even then, there could be some unforeseen costs and long timelines before it actually starts paying dividends. So I think
Well,
that's
there's a flip side to that too. You know, even if you're fortunate enough to catch lightning in a bottle in a space that is not your space, the cost of maintaining that and continuing to advance that, is a whole nother ballgame too. And so it's just a very difficult, calculated risk. But, for some companies, not just limited to commercial real estate, obviously, but, when you're, major players in an industry, and I think you could make the argument that any industry has risk of disruption. You can't sit around and wait for failure either. Waiting around for disruption sounds like a horrible alternative. And when the CCIM leadership was in New Orleans this past week for strategic planning, and we had the opportunity, Steve Rich, current president, myself, and Andy Edmonds, who will serve as president after me, we had the opportunity to talk to the JWL Leadership Academy there, and I brought to their attention that if you go back to the day that the CCIM Institute was founded in the 50s, that there's only 52 names from what was the Fortune 500 list then that are still in existence today. And that was you think about between the 50s and now, the rate of disruption and technologies that exist today compared to what it was in the 50s. How many Fortune 500 companies from today will exist in that same 70-year period? If I had to place a bet, I would say that it would be less than the same 52.
wow. Yeah, I mean that does really illustrate a picture that things will change. Doesn't matter how big you are and how secure you feel. Things will change. So you either need to be ahead of it to change as things change, or you may get left behind.
Right.
Now, pivoting a little bit, I'd love to get your insights on the commercial real estate market in general, especially in your focus on Southern Florida, and your advice on how brokers can stay competitive in today's landscape.
Sure. We can talk about macro perspective for the United States first. Generally speaking, I think that there's been a positive sentiment, business and industry wise, again, from macro perspective with the change of administration. And we hear that sentiment even when, as a CCIM Institute, we hear from some other nations. So I think that there's some cautious optimism from a macro perspective on the industry. Here where I'm based in Florida, I continue to be bullish. We've been a significant beneficiary from the pandemic migration. 1,000 people a day moving to Florida. And to me, that's going to be a critical benchmark and metric to try to sustain. We've had some rough goes as it pertains to storms that could potentially be disruptive to sustaining that kind of population increase. And so I'm certainly hoping that we can go through the next summer without a significant one. And some of that has also led to another issue that I'm trying to keep an eye on industry wide. But the rising operating expenses, not just insurance, but that being a very important line item on there. I think that that's something that we as an industry and through advocacy that we need to try to get ahead of. I feel that when you're looking at some of these CAM rates that are starting to be in excess of what a good base rent used to be, there's a problem there. And you're starting to see some rent resistance from tenants, especially with small businesses. And I think that a lot of our elected leaders sometimes may have some difficulty in seeing similarity, that the small businesses are often like the husband and wife sitting at their kitchen table trying to justify the size of the mortgage payment that they're paying. They're paying little mind to how much of that check is going to principal, interest, taxes, insurance, segregated. Much like the small business tenant doesn't really care how much of it's going to base rent and CAM. It's the size of the check that they need to write. And when that check is getting too large to write, how do you look at CAM? CAM is what it is. It's how much it takes to operate the property. And so then you need to look at the next variable with base rent. And if base rent has to come down because there's rent resistance due to rising operating expenses, well, base rents come down, property values come down. Property values come down, assessed values come down. Assessed values come down, tax roll goes down, and usually that's when they notice. And so I would encourage everybody out there to try to encourage your elected officials to be more proactive than reactive on the subject.
Yeah, everybody notices when their pocket gets lighter, and sometimes that's what it takes before, people actually open their eyes.
Right.
Taking a macro look, in that same vein, how do macroeconomic factors like hesitant interest rate cuts and lingering inflation shape your strategic recommendation for clients?
At the C5 plus CCIM conference last September in Hollywood, chief economist for NAR, Dr. Lawrence Yoon, was on stage, and this was immediately and shortly after the Fed had their first 50 basis point lowering to the Fed rate there. And Dr. Yoon on stage there, despite that 50 basis point cut, and at that time, the 5-year Treasury was also at a 52-week low right at that time. And despite that reduction, he announced to the crowd that he could foresee that there was going to be another 6 to 8 Fed rate reductions coming up by the end of the next year. At first, I was very hesitant to agree to that because I didn't feel that many reductions would maybe necessarily need to be required to combat inflation itself. Then shortly thereafter, maybe 5 weeks after that, at a conference in Boston, Dr. Yoon doubled down. And despite the fact, that the 5-year Treasury at that time had risen almost 100 basis points from when he was speaking in Hollywood, he said, yeah, I'm still forecasting another 5 to 6 Fed rate discussions or reductions. And so it made me start to think that maybe it's a little bit more than just inflation. There's plenty of discussion and concern too, about the amount of maturing debt that we're forecasted to see in the next year, 2, 3 years. Right. And the Fed only has so many levers that they can pull. And so then I started maybe wondering a little bit, maybe that has a little bit more to do with providing a lower cost of capital from bank to bank, and maybe that will help create some lubrication on some of this maturing debt instead of taking it back and experiencing some of the REO bloodshed that we experienced 15, 20 years ago. Maybe this would create a better market to do some blend and extend out there on some of these paper. But ultimately the strategies that are being implemented by my clients and involved deep analysis and very calculated risks with limited debt exposure. And so when it comes to that maturing debt, we'll let that component of the market work itself out.
Right. Well, it probably does create for some, opportunities down the road here. And I'm wondering, what are some of the biggest opportunities that you see for investors in your market today?
Well, to each their own, and categorizing it as the best opportunities. I'm one of those firm believers that, whatever widget you're a fan of and wherever you are in practicing business and commercial real estate, there's opportunity to be found. There are deals to be found with any sector, with any geography. I'm convinced of that. But if you're looking for an example of something that, I found eyebrow raising maybe in the past year, You see, powerhouse tenants of yesteryear, investment grade tenants that the pendulum and the climate and their perspective can change really quickly. You look at what happened with Walgreens and Dollar General as a couple examples last year. In some cases, you saw 200 basis point increases to yield expectations just to get some of these properties sold. Now, I wouldn't say that across the board, because of that rise in yield, that made all of them a great candidates. But if you started looking at some of the real estate itself, there were circumstances to where some sellers had to really inflate their cap rate at disposition just to get it off the books. And some of those properties had pretty low contract rents. And some of those properties, despite the fact that they had little or short lease terms remaining, some of it was really good real estate, on a good artery. And so if you felt that your risk was protected to where your worst case might be that they actually do extend, I liked the idea of our worst case scenario having a tenant like a Dollar General or a Walgreens in our portfolio a couple hundred basis points higher than maybe what the expectation should have been, only because they had short lease terms. But the value add principle on some of these tenants and properties that might have lost some popularity last year with the blue chip methodology. But I'll throw another Buffett quote out there. He also famously said, "You can never do well buying what's popular."
Would you mind sharing for fellow brokers what prospecting or client development strategies do you think brokers should be implementing in today's landscape?
Yeah, and I try to get better at this one all the time myself. I try to put a heavy emphasis on time blocking. And I know that the concept sounds easy and elementary, but really just being disciplined in it. It's so easy for brokers, even myself, to just kind of get caught up in the moment of managing your existing book, that you may forget about allocating the appropriate amount of time for prospecting. But whatever it is that you feel makes the most sense, practical sense to where you're going to be able to achieve it, whether it's an hour a day, an hour a week, hour a month, whatever it is, start somewhere small, time block it, turn off everything else. You're not looking at a single email, you're not answering another phone call, but you're putting in the appropriate time to try to make new relationships in business development.
And what advice would you give to experienced professionals looking to stay competitive in the industry?
Team building. There's only so much time in a day. And if you're trying to grow your book of business to be larger than what you've been physically doing for how many ever past years, or maybe you're trying to grow in other geographies that might not be your primary backyard. It's cliche, but team building is such an important part of this industry. But one of the things that I will add an asterisk to on the team building is to empower with entrepreneurial spirit too. I think a lot of times, we'll call them the breadwinners of our industry, when they have juniors and others that they're putting on their team, I think a lot of times they're building their team to keep them in the nest. And maybe sometimes that involves not teaching them to fish as well. I'm a big Richard Branson fan as well. And I've always loved a quote of his that's applicable to these regards. But he says, "Train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them well enough so that they don't want to."
Well, given your expertise, I'd love to close this out with a few of our rapid fire advice questions that we give every guest when they join the podcast. You ready? All right, let's go. So if you were given $50 million today and you had to invest it immediately, what would your go-to asset type and location be, and why?
Probably first generation value add flex parks, particularly in an underbuilt geography. By that, I liked to look at the size of the market and look at the size of the population in the area to figure out, what the square footage per resident metric is for those areas. And that can give you a better idea of what might be underbuilt, what might be overbuilt, and based on some other trends, as we were talking earlier about different level of analytics, trying to figure out, what is making a strong case for being an emerging market in that sector. Outside of those variables, I really love the sector, not only Flex itself, because, I was involved in a Flex park here in Southwest Florida that, we had, distribution tenants, we had Fortune 500 Flex tenants, we had an orthopedic surgeon, we had a swim school. It's called Flex because it is so flexible. There's so many different uses that can be put in there. And anytime you can expand your target market, that's going to be a great thing. But I also like just some of the general nature of the industrial prospects on second generation tenancy from first generation. I largely cut my teeth in this industry on office space. And when you're looking at TIs these days, the likelihood of going from a first generation to a second generation office tenant and thinking that you don't have to move some walls around, it's getting fewer and further between. Almost always are you looking to do something to a space plan change. And it is so expensive these days. I remember when I started in the business, it wasn't completely unrealistic to think that we can spend, maybe $30, $40 in build out from box and have completed product. Nowadays, you start moving any walls around and it just shoots up to, $80, $100 a square foot just like that. And your yield disappears. Meanwhile, if you have a 10,000 square foot warehouse, a lot of times you'll get a no nonsense second generation decision maker comes into the space, does a circle looking around. I'll take it. Maybe you change 1,000 square foot of flooring in the office, but your yield is very sustainable. The product is getting more and more popular. So I'm a big fan of industrial.
Nice. Now, what's the craziest or most unusual way you found a new client, either with social media or another way?
Lots of stories in that vein. I think that one is just a message of you never know where those crazy opportunities are going to present themselves. And so go back to the story over sushi, are you an order taker or a salesperson? If you're an opportunist and you have a burning entrepreneurial spirit, I think which one, can benefit you a little bit more. But, a quick story. So one day I was walking into Office Depot to pick up a product and went to the aisle of the product that I needed to grab. And I noticed an elderly gentleman there that had a look of just pure befuddlement on his face. And so having a tech background and being who I am, I leaned over and said, "Hey, can I help you out a little bit?" And so he said, "Oh, thank you." And he said he was wanting to set up a Wi-Fi network in his house. And so I started asking him some of the natural questions of, okay, how big is your house? And what do you usually use for the internet for? And how many people in your house might be using internet at the same time? And after he made some suggestions or answered those questions, I pointed him to a couple products that I thought would meet his needs. And he grabbed those products and he proceeded to the front register. And I already had my product, so I got in line behind him. And he did a double take and said, "You don't work here?" I said, No, you just looked like somebody that could use a little help. And he was incredibly thankful, insisted that he take me to lunch as a sign of appreciation. And about 6 months later, I sold that guy a hotel.
Wow.
So you never know. Yeah, it's if you're a deal junkie and you like to do more deals, just always be on your game because there's opportunity around just about every corner.
Yeah, I mean, great plug for Office Depot too.
I'm sure there's going to be some reams of paper sitting on my doorstep when I get back.
Let's go. Well, I mean, they should be springing for ink. Let's be honest here. Now, next one, promise is not a trick question, but what's your favorite tool or software you use on the job?
Not a trick question. Well, it's Crexi, of course. No, and that's not a shameless plug for Crexi, who is hosting this podcast. I think that there's such a lot of different tools that as professionals that we can use out there, and much like we talked earlier about not keeping all your eggs in one basket. You find out what's going to work best for you. My personal opinion, I think Crexi is leading the space when it comes to income producing investment properties, especially on the net investment side. I think that you're just doing a tremendous job at that, and I think that industry professionals like myself are taking notice. But again, just try to stay diverse and make sure that you're using as many tools that you can to better your business.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. The printer ink is on its way to you now. As we wrap up here, any parting words that you'd like to share with our audience?
No, other than thank you for the opportunity, and to the industry professionals out there, just work hard. The biggest thing that we talked about here that I'd really like to convey to you again is there's two things that you can't train in this industry. We already talked about one of them being the hustle and the raw determination, and the other one, the ability to establish rapport with people. But if you really enjoy working with people and people enjoy working with you, and you have a great work ethic, I think this is a tremendous industry for you, and that there's endless opportunities.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that and for joining us and sharing all your insights. I know you're very busy, and we appreciate you spending time to sit down with us.
Thank you, Yannis, and thank you, everyone else.
Where can people find you online if they want to get in touch? Email, social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can email me, adam@adampalmer.com, and you can go to the subsequent website, which would have the rest of my contact information. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn. I tend to be a little bit more active on that social platform than any other.
Or you can hang out in a Home Depot and,
you never know.
Look for routers. Well, thanks again for coming, and thanks to everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this episode, do not miss the next one. Visit crexi.com/podcast and sign up to get the next episode delivered straight to your inbox. Of course, you can also subscribe to the Crexi Podcast on your favorite podcast app and check out our YouTube channel for video recordings of each episode. Take care, and be sure to tune in next time.